The desert sun blazed mercilessly over Forward Operating Base Hammer in Afghanistan, casting long shadows across the tarmac where Staff Sergeant Maria Santos wiped grease from her hands with a worn rag. At 28 years old, she had spent the last 6 years of her life elbow-deep in aircraft engines, hydraulic systems, and avionics panels. To most people on the base, she was simply the mechanic, another face in coveralls who kept the birds flying. But what they didn't know was that Maria Santos carried a secret that would soon save 180 lives and change military aviation history forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria had grown up in a small town in New Mexico, where her father ran a struggling auto repair shop. While other girls her age were playing with dolls, Maria was learning the difference between a carburetor and a fuel injector. By the time she was 16, she could rebuild an engine blindfolded. But her dreams reached far beyond the dusty streets of her hometown. She wanted to fly. When she enlisted in the Air Force at 18, Maria thought she'd be fast-tracked to pilot training. Her SVAB scores were through the roof, her physical fitness was exemplary, and her passion for aviation was undeniable, but the military had other plans. "We need good mechanics more than we need pilots," her recruiter had told her. "Besides, aviation maintenance is where the real heroes work. Without you, those pilots are just expensive paperweights." It wasn't what she wanted to hear, but Maria threw herself into her training with characteristic determination. She graduated top of her class from the Aircraft Maintenance Technical School, specializing in the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the legendary Warthog that had been the backbone of close air support missions for decades. The A-10 was ugly loud and built around a massive 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon. But Maria fell in love with its rugged simplicity and incredible durability. Over the years, Maria became something of a legend among the maintenance crews. She could diagnose problems that stumped seasoned technicians with decades of experience. She had an almost supernatural ability to listen to an engine and know exactly what was wrong. Other mechanics would bring her their most challenging cases, and she rarely disappointed. But despite her expertise, she remained overlooked by the brass. To them, she was just another wrench-turner, valuable but replaceable. What nobody knew, not her commanding officers, not her fellow mechanics, not even most of her friends, was that Maria had been secretly training as a pilot. Every weekend, for the past 3 years, she had driven to a small civilian airport 2 hours away, where an old Vietnam veteran named Chuck taught flying lessons in a beat-up Cessna 172, using her savings and working extra shifts. Maria had slowly accumulated flight hours, studying aerodynamics, navigation, and flight procedures with the same intensity she brought to engine maintenance. Chuck, a former F-4 Phantom pilot who had flown over 200 combat missions, recognized something special in Maria. "You've got the touch, kid," he'd tell her after particularly challenging lessons. "Most pilots fight the airplane. You talk to it." Maria had earned her private pilot's license 18 months ago, but she kept it quiet. In the rigid hierarchy of military aviation, mechanics who harbored pilot dreams were often seen as disloyal or unfocused. Now, as she stood on the flight line at Forward Hammer, Maria watched the A-10s return from their morning sorties. The distinctive whine of their twin turbofan engines was music to her ears, but today something was different. Warhawk 23, piloted by Captain Jake Morrison, was coming in hot with smoke trailing from its left engine. Maria grabbed her tools and sprinted toward the designated landing area, her mind already running through possible failure scenarios. The A-10 touched down hard, its landing gear straining under the impact. As it rolled to a stop, Maria could see the damage. Shrapnel from a surface-to-air missile had peppered the left engine compartment, and hydraulic fluid was leaking onto the tarmac. Captain Morrison climbed out of the cockpit, his flight suit soaked with sweat. "How bad is it, Santos?" he asked, pulling off his helmet. Maria was already running her hands along the damaged areas, her trained eye cataloging every puncture, every severed line, every compromised system. "She live," she said finally. "Give me 4 hours, and she be ready to fly again." Morrison shook his head in amazement. "I don't know how you do it, Sergeant. Half the time I think you know these birds better than we do." If only he knew how right he was. As Maria began coordinating the repair effort, organizing her team of junior mechanics and ordering replacement parts, she had no idea that in just 72 hours, all of her secret training, all of her mechanical expertise, and all of her hidden dreams would converge in a moment of crisis that would test every skill she had ever learned. The quiet mechanic who had spent years being underestimated was about to become the most important person on the entire base. 3 days after the incident with Warhawk 23, forward operating base hammer buzzed with unusual activity. Intelligence had identified a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition supply convoys throughout the region. The man, known by the code name Desert Viper, had been planning a major offensive that could disrupt operations for months. The window to strike was narrow, 12 hours at most before he would disappear back into the mountains. The mission required precision timing and overwhelming firepower. Command had authorized a massive air assault involving 6 A-10 Thunderbolt Es, 4 Apache helicopters, and 2 C-130 gunships. The target was a fortified compound in a valley approximately 200 miles northeast of the base, surrounded by steep mountains and accessible only through a narrow canyon approach. Intelligence estimated that Desert Viper had between 150 and 200 heavily armed fighters protecting the compound. Maria spent the pre-dawn hours conducting final inspections on all 6 A-10s. Each aircraft carried a full combat load, AGM-65, Maverick missiles, Mark 82 general-purpose bombs, and maximum ammunition for their devastating AU-8 cannons. She personally checked every system, every connection, every component that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As the sun began to rise, the pilots gathered for their final briefing. Maria watched from the maintenance bay as Captain Morrison, now designated as flight leader for this mission, outlined the attack plan. The A-10s would approach in 2 flights of 3 aircraft each, with Morrison's flight designated as Hammer Flight and the second group as Anvil Flight. They would coordinate with the Apache helicopters to provide close air support for a special operations team that would assault the compound from the ground. "Weather's looking good," Morrison announced, pointing to satellite imagery displayed on a large screen. "Clear skies, minimal wind. We'll have excellent visibility for target acquisition. The compound is here." He indicated a cluster of buildings in the valley, approximately 15 miles from the nearest civilian population. "Rules of engagement are weapons-free once we confirm target identification." The mission profile called for a low-level approach through the mountain passes, staying below radar coverage until the final attack run. Each pilot would make multiple passes, systematically destroying defensive positions before the ground assault team moved in. The entire operation was expected to last no more than 45 minutes from initial contact to extraction. Maria felt a familiar pang of longing as she watched the pilots strap into their aircraft. Despite her years of experience maintaining these machines, despite knowing every bolt, wire, and hydraulic line better than most people knew their own cars, she had never experienced the rush of combat flight. She could only imagine what it felt like to push an A-10 through a mountain pass at 300 feet, the massive cannon ready to unleash devastating firepower on enemy positions. The 6 A-10s taxied out information, their engines creating a thunderous symphony that echoed across the desert. Maria stood with the other maintenance personnel, watching as her birds, aircraft she had personally prepared and certified, lifted off into the clear morning sky. Each plane represented hundreds of hours of her work, her expertise, her dedication to keeping these pilots safe and their missions successful. "Think they'll all come back?" asked Airman First Class Tommy Rodriguez, one of Maria's junior mechanics. "They always do," Maria replied, though she crossed herself quietly. In her 6 years of maintenance duty, she had seen aircraft return from missions shot full of holes, systems failing, pilots wounded but alive. The A-10's reputation for survivability was legendary, and Maria took personal pride in knowing that. Her meticulous maintenance work contributed to that reputation. As the formation disappeared over the horizon, Maria turned her attention to preparing for their return. Combat missions always resulted in aircraft damage, if not from enemy fire, then from the stress of high-G maneuvers, low-level flying, and weapons employment. She began organizing repair supplies, coordinating with the medical team in case of wounded pilots, and setting up the maintenance bay for rapid, post-flight inspections. The base settled into the tense quiet that always accompanied major combat. Operations. Radio chatter from the Tactical Operations Center provided updates. Hammer flight approaching initial point. Ground team in position. Apache flight standing by. Maria found herself glancing at the clock every few minutes, mentally tracking the mission timeline based on flight plans she had studied obsessively. At 0847 hours, the first radio transmission changed everything. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Hammer. 2-1. We have multiple aircraft hit, multiple systems failures. We're going to need immediate medical and crash recovery at Hammer Base." Maria's blood ran cold. Hammer 2-1 was Captain Morrison's aircraft, the same A-10 she had repaired just 3 days earlier. She grabbed her radio and switched to the maintenance frequency. "All maintenance personnel, this is Santos. Prepare for emergency recovery operations. We may have multiple aircraft inbound with battle damage." The next transmission made her heart stop. "Hammer Base, this is Colonel Davidson. We have a situation. Hammer 2-1 is critically damaged and barely controllable. Captain Morrison is unconscious from head trauma. The aircraft is being flown by." There was a long pause by Staff Sergeant Santos. The radio crackled with confusion and disbelief. Maria stared at the speaker, certain she had misheard. But then came Morrison's weak voice, barely audible over the engine noise and static. "Santos took the stick when I blacked out. She's flying us home. Don't know how, but she's keeping us in the air." Every person on the base frequency fell silent. The mechanic was flying the plane. The story of how Staff Sergeant Maria Santos ended. Up in the pilot's seat of a critically damaged A-10 Thunderbolt II, began with a catastrophic series of events that unfolded in the span of just 3 minutes over the mountains of Afghanistan. Hammer flight had successfully located the target compound and begun their attack runs when disaster struck. Desert Viper's forces had been expecting them. Intelligence later revealed that the Taliban commander had received advance warning of the assault. The valley that was supposed to provide tactical advantage had become a killing field, with concealed anti-aircraft positions positioned on the surrounding ridgelines. The ambush was devastating and coordinated. As the 6 A-10s descended into the valley for their initial attack pass, surface-to-air missiles and heavy machine gun fire erupted from multiple positions simultaneously. The rugged warthogs, designed to absorb punishment and keep flying, found themselves facing more concentrated anti-aircraft fire than any of the pilots had ever encountered. Hammer 2-1, with Captain Morrison at the controls, had just released its first pair of Maverick missiles when a ZSU-234 anti-aircraft gun opened fire from a concealed position. The 23mm shells tore through the aircraft's left wing and engine compartment, severing hydraulic lines and destroying primary flight control systems. Morrison fought to maintain control as warning lights illuminated his cockpit like a deadly Christmas tree. Hammer 2-1 taking heavy fire, Morrison transmitted through gritted teeth. Multiple systems failures, hydraulics are gone, flight controls barely responding, but the worst was yet to come. As Morrison pulled up from his attack run, trying to gain altitude and escape the kill zone, a second burst of anti-aircraft fire struck the cockpit area. A 23mm shell penetrated the armored canopy rail and exploded inside the cockpit, sending shrapnel throughout the confined space. Morrison was struck in the head by debris, his helmet cracked, blood immediately obscuring his vision. The aircraft began an uncontrolled descent toward the mountainous terrain below. Morrison, fighting to remain conscious despite his head injury, managed one final radio transmission. Hammer 2-1 going down. Cat C... losing consciousness... It was at that moment that Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, who had been monitoring the mission frequency from the maintenance bay back at FOB Hammer, made a decision that defied every military protocol and regulation in existence. Using an encrypted radio frequency that she had discovered months earlier while troubleshooting communication systems, she contacted Morrison directly. "Captain Morrison, this is Santos. If you can hear me, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to talk you through this." Morrison's response was barely coherent. "Santos? How are you... radio frequency? I can't see... aircraft won't respond." "Sir, I need you to reach down to your right and feel for the backup flight control panel. There should be a red guarded switch labeled manual reversion. Can you find it?" Through sheer determination and muscle memory, Morrison located the switch. "Found it... manual reversion... activate it now, sir. That will give you direct mechanical control to the flight surfaces. It won't be pretty, but you'll have some control authority." The manual reversion system, a backup feature designed for exactly this type of emergency, provided direct mechanical linkage between the control stick and the aircraft's control surfaces. It was crude, requiring tremendous physical strength, and offering minimal precision, but it could keep an A-10 airborne when all other systems failed. Morrison flipped the switch and immediately felt the control stick become heavy and resistant. "It's working. I have some control. But Santos, I can't see anything. Blood in my eyes, vision going in and out." "Sir, I need you to do something that's going to sound crazy. I need you to unbuckle your harness and move to the right side of the cockpit. I'm going to guide you through switching seats with me." "Switch seats? Santos, you're 200 miles away at base... "No, sir, I'm not." Maria's voice was steady despite the impossibility of what she was about to reveal. "I've been in the back seat this entire mission. I came along as an observer to monitor aircraft systems performance during combat operations." The truth was even more incredible than Morrison could have imagined. 3 weeks earlier, Maria had approached Colonel Davidson with a proposal for a new maintenance protocol, having experienced mechanics fly along on combat missions to provide real-time diagnostic support and immediate repairs if needed. Program was highly classified and experimental, with only a handful of people knowing about it. Maria had been riding in the rear seat of Morrison's A-10, monitoring system performance and ready to provide technical support if needed. When the aircraft was hit and Morrison injured, Maria found herself in the unique position of being both a qualified pilot, thanks to her secret civilian training, and the person who knew this specific aircraft better than anyone else alive. She had personally maintained Hammer 2-1 for over 2 years, knew every quirk of its systems, every compensating adjustment needed to keep it flying smoothly. "Santos, are you telling me you can fly this thing?" Morrison asked, his voice weak but hopeful. "Sir, I've been flying for 3 years, and I know this aircraft inside and out. With your permission, I'm going to take the controls and get us home." The cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II was not designed for crew changes during flight, especially not with one pilot injured and the aircraft severely damaged. But Maria had studied every inch of the cockpit layout during her maintenance training. She knew where every switch, lever, and control was located without looking. Carefully, she helped Morrison unbuckle and move to the rear observer seat, then slipped into the pilot's position. As her hands touched the control stick, she felt the wounded aircraft respond to her touch. The manual reversion system was heavy and unforgiving, but her years of civilian flight training had prepared her for difficult aircraft handling situations. "Hammer Base, this is Hammer 2-1, Maria transmitted, her voice calm and professional. "Captain Morrison is injured but stable. I have control of the aircraft and am beginning return flight to base. Request immediate medical and crash recovery." Preparation. The impossible had become reality. The mechanic was flying the plane home. The moment Maria Santos took control of Hammer 2-1, every person monitoring the radio frequency at forward operating base Hammer fell into stunned silence. The impossible was happening 200 miles away in the mountains of Afghanistan. A maintenance sergeant was flying a critically damaged A-10 Thunderbolt II through hostile airspace with an unconscious pilot in the back seat. Colonel Davidson was the first to break the silence from the Tactical Operations Center. "Santos, confirm your status. Are you saying you have taken pilot controls of that aircraft?" "Affirmative, sir," Maria responded, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her. "Captain Morrison suffered head trauma from shrapnel impact. He's conscious but unable to see clearly. I have assumed pilot duties and am currently maintaining level flight at Angels 15, heading 270 toward home base." The radio crackled with background conversations as officers tried to process what they were hearing. A mechanic, a staff sergeant with no official pilot training, was flying a multi-million-dollar combat aircraft that had been shot to pieces by enemy fire. It violated every protocol, every safety regulation, every assumption about military chain of command and professional specialization. But Maria didn't have time to worry about regulations. The aircraft was barely holding together, and she could feel it deteriorating by the minute. The manual reversion system gave her basic control authority, but it was like trying to steer a freight train with a bicycle handlebar. Every control input required tremendous physical strength, and the aircraft's responses were sluggish and unpredictable. "Santos, this is Master Sergeant Williams from maintenance," came a familiar voice over the radio. Williams was her direct supervisor, a 20-year veteran who had mentored her throughout her career. "Talk to me about your aircraft status. What systems do you have operational?" Maria quickly scanned the instrument panel, her eyes moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had studied every gauge and indicator countless times during maintenance procedures. "Hydraulic systems are completely failed. I'm on manual reversion for flight controls. Left engine is severely damaged but still producing power. Right engine appears normal. I've lost most electrical systems, flying on battery power and backup instruments only. How's your fuel situation?" Williams asked. Maria checked the fuel gauges, her heart sinking as she saw the readings. Fuel is critical. The anti-aircraft fire must have punctured the tanks. I'm showing less than 30 minutes of fuel remaining at current consumption rate. The mathematics of survival were brutal and unforgiving. Maria was flying a damaged aircraft with minimal control authority, critically low fuel, and limited navigational instruments. She had to cover 200 miles of mountainous terrain while avoiding additional enemy positions, then execute a landing in an aircraft that was barely controllable under the best of circumstances. "Santos, this is Colonel Davidson. I'm going to be direct with you. The odds of successfully landing that aircraft are minimal. We need to discuss ejection procedures and search and rescue coordination." Maria's response was immediate and unwavering. "Sir, with respect, ejection is not an option. Captain Morrison is in no condition to survive an ejection sequence, and this aircraft contains classified systems and weapons that cannot fall into enemy hands. I'm bringing her home." What Colonel Davidson didn't know, what nobody at the base knew, was that Maria had been preparing for exactly this type of emergency for years. During her civilian flight training with Chuck, the old Vietnam veteran had put her through every conceivable emergency scenario. Engine failures, electrical fires, complete instrument failures, forced landings in impossible conditions. Chuck believed that any pilot worth their wings should be able to handle whatever the sky could throw at them. Flying is 10% normal operations and 90% managing emergencies, Chuck had told her during one particularly challenging lesson. Any fool can fly when everything's working. A real pilot shines when everything goes to hell. Now 15,000 feet above the Afghanistan mountains, Maria drew on every lesson Chuck had taught her. She began calculating glide ratios, identifying potential emergency landing sites, and mentally rehearsing the approach procedures for Fob Hammer's runway. The wounded A-10 was like an injured animal, fighting her every input, but she could feel its personality through the controls. "Morrison, how are you doing back there?" she called to the injured captain. "Hanging in there," Morrison replied weakly. "Santos, I don't know what kind of training you have, but you're flying this bird like you've been doing it for years. Where did you learn to handle an A-10? Long story, sir. Right now I need you to help me with navigation. My GPS is dead and I'm flying on compass headings. Can you see anything out the right side windows?" Morrison squinted through his damaged visor, trying to make sense of the terrain below. "I can make out what looks like a river valley. And there's a road following the valley floor. Looks like it might be Highway 1. Maria felt a surge of relief. Highway 1 was a major transportation corridor that would lead them directly back to their operational area. If she could follow the road, she could navigate by landmarks and dead reckoning, skills that Chuck had drilled into her during countless cross-country flights in the old Cessna. "That's it," she said. "We're going to follow that road home. Morrison, I need you to stay alert and help me spot landmarks. We're going to make it." As Maria banked the damaged A-10 toward the highway, she had no idea that her words were being heard by more than just the people at Fob Hammer. The mission frequency was being monitored by coalition forces throughout the region, and word was spreading rapidly through military communication networks. A mechanic was flying a shot-up A-10 through enemy territory, and everyone with access to a radio was listening to see if she could pull off the impossible dot as Hammer 2-1 limped across the Afghan landscape. Maria Santos faced a deadly equation that would have challenged even the most experienced combat pilot. She had less than 25 minutes of fuel remaining, 200 miles of hostile territory to cross, and an aircraft that was degrading with every passing minute. But the most critical factor was something that nobody at FOB Hammer yet understood. The real reason why ejection wasn't an option. "Santos, this is Colonel Davidson. I need a complete status update on Captain Morrison's condition. Medical is standing by, but we need to know what we're dealing with." Maria glanced back at Morrison, who was slumped in the rear seat, his flight helmet cracked and blood still seeping from wounds on his scalp. "Sir, the captain has significant head trauma. He's conscious but disoriented, possible concussion, and I suspect internal injuries from the shrapnel blast. But there's something else you need to know." She paused, gathering the courage to reveal information that would change everything. "Colonel, during the attack on the compound, we observed enemy forces moving what appeared to be American prisoners toward a convoy of vehicles. The Special Operations Team was compromised. They're requesting immediate extraction for wounded personnel. According to their last transmission, they have 18 critically wounded soldiers who need emergency medical evacuation." The silence on the radio frequency was profound as the implications sank in. The mission had gone catastrophically wrong. Not only was Maria flying a nearly destroyed A-10 with an injured pilot, but there were 18 American soldiers trapped behind enemy lines who would die without immediate medical attention. Santos, are you telling me that there are 18 wounded personnel waiting for extraction? Colonel Davidson's voice was tight with controlled emotion. That's affirmative. Sir, but it gets worse. The compound we attacked was a trap. Intelligence estimates suggest that Desert Viper has been consolidating his forces for weeks, preparing for a major offensive against coalition positions. We observed at least 500 enemy fighters moving toward coalition forward operating bases throughout the region. If they launch coordinated attacks against our dispersed positions, we could be looking at casualties in the hundreds. The mathematics of military crisis management were brutal. FOB Hammer housed 180 personnel, soldiers, airmen, contractors, and support staff who had been deployed to this remote outpost to provide close air support for operations throughout eastern Afghanistan. If Desert Viper's forces launched their planned offensive, the base would be overrun within hours. Colonel, there's more, Maria continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. During our attack runs, I was monitoring enemy communications through the aircraft's electronic intelligence gathering systems. Desert Viper has been coordinating with multiple Taliban commanders throughout the region. They're planning simultaneous attacks on FOB Hammer, FOB Lightning, and FOB Thunder at 1400 hours today, in less than 3 hours. The revelation hit the Tactical Operations Center like a thunderbolt. 3 forward operating bases, containing nearly 600 coalition personnel, were about to come under coordinated attack by overwhelming enemy forces. The only early warning had come from a mechanic flying a shot-up A-10 through hostile airspace. Santos, this is Major Peterson from Intelligence. Can you confirm the source and reliability of this information? Sir, I've been cross-training with the electronic warfare specialists for the past year, Maria replied, working the aircraft's controls as she spoke. The intelligence gathering suite on the A-10 picked up multiple encrypted radio transmissions that I was able to partially decode, using techniques I learned during my advanced maintenance training. The attack is definitely planned for 1400 hours, and they have significant force multipliers, mortar, rocket-propelled grenades, and what appeared to be vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What nobody at FOB Hammer realized was that Maria's cross-training with electronic warfare specialists had been far more extensive than anyone knew. During her off-duty hours, she had been studying signals intelligence, electronic countermeasures, and communication intercept techniques with the same intensity she brought to aircraft maintenance. Her natural aptitude for technology and her mechanical background had made her exceptionally skilled at understanding complex electronic systems. As Hammer 2-1 continued its desperate flight toward home, Maria was simultaneously flying the aircraft, monitoring Morrison's condition, and analyzing the intelligence data she had gathered during the failed mission. The picture that emerged was terrifying. Desert Viper had been using the compound as bait, luring coalition forces into a trap while his main forces prepared for a coordinated assault on multiple targets. Colonel, I'm transmitting the electronic intelligence data to base now, Maria announced, activating the aircraft's secure data link system. You should be receiving encrypted files containing enemy communication intercepts, force disposition estimates, and tactical movement patterns. This information needs to get to regional command immediately. The data transmission represented Maria's final insurance policy. Even if she and Morrison didn't survive the landing attempt, the intelligence information would reach coalition commanders in time to prepare defensive measures for the impending attacks. The 18 wounded soldiers awaiting extraction, the 180 personnel at FOB Hammer, and hundreds of other coalition forces throughout the region would have advance warning of what was coming, but transmitting the data required using the aircraft's remaining electrical power that was critical for navigation and flight control systems. Maria was making a calculated sacrifice, trading her own survival odds to ensure that the intelligence reached friendly forces in time to save lives. Santos were showing successful data reception, came the voice of the intelligence officer. This information is being forwarded to higher headquarters immediately. You may have just prevented a catastrophic defeat. As the damaged A-10 crossed into friendly airspace, Maria could see FOB Hammer in the distance, a small cluster of buildings and hardened structures surrounded by desert. But her fuel gauges now showed less than 10 minutes of flying time remaining, and the left engine was beginning to run rough as damaged components finally started to fail completely. Hammer Base, this is Santos. I have the field in sight, but we're running on fumes. Request immediate preparation for emergency landing procedures. And Colonel, start preparing the base for siege conditions. They're coming for us in less than 3 hours. As forward operating base Hammer appeared on the horizon, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos faced the most challenging approach and landing of her life. The wounded A-10 was barely holding together, running on vapor fumes and responding to controls like a freight train with square wheels. But the most terrifying aspect of her situation wasn't the mechanical challenges. It was the knowledge that 180 people were depending on her to not only survive this landing, but to get the critical intelligence to the right people before Desert Viper's forces launched their coordinated assault. Santos, this is Tower. We have you in sight approximately 15 miles out. What are your intentions for approach and landing? The air traffic controller's voice was professionally calm, but Maria could hear the underlying tension. Everyone on the base knew that they were watching an impossible situation unfold. Tower, I'll be making a straight-in approach to runway 27. I have minimal fuel remaining, no hydraulic assist for controls, and limited electrical power. Request that you have crash and rescue standing by, along with medical personnel for Captain Morrison. Maria looked at her fuel gauges one more time and felt her stomach drop. The needles were bouncing on empty, and she could hear subtle changes in engine noise that indicated fuel starvation was imminent. In her civilian training, Chuck had taught her that the most dangerous part of any emergency was the final approach, when pilots often made critical mistakes due to stress and fatigue. Remember, kid, Chuck's voice echoed in her memory, when everything goes to hell, you fly the airplane first, navigate second, and communicate third. Don't let anyone on the radio distract you from the basics. Airspeed, altitude, and attitude, everything else is just details. Morrison, how are you holding up? Maria called to the injured captain. Getting worse, Morrison admitted, his voice weak and slurred. Vision is getting blurry, and I think I might be going into shock. Santos, whatever training you have, now's the time to use it. I can't help you anymore. The weight of responsibility was crushing. Maria was no longer just trying to save herself and Captain Morrison. She was carrying intelligence that could prevent a massacre. The electronic intercept she had transmitted contained detailed information about enemy force positions, attack timing, and tactical plans. But the data was incomplete, and she possessed additional intelligence that hadn't been transmitted due to the aircraft's failing electrical systems. Colonel Davidson, this is Santos. I need to brief you on additional intelligence that I wasn't able to transmit. Desert Viper's forces have acquired American weapons and equipment, including Stinger missiles and advanced communication gear. They're planning to use captured American frequencies to create confusion during their attack. The implications were staggering. If enemy forces could monitor and disrupt American communications during the assault, coordination of defensive measures would be nearly impossible. The bases would be fighting blind, unable to call for reinforcements or coordinate mutual support. Santos, we copy your transmission. Intelligence teams are analyzing the data you provided. Right now, our priority is getting you on the ground safely. We need you and Morrison alive to provide complete debriefing on what you observed. As Maria began her approach to FOB Hammer, she could see the entire base spread out below her. The runway was a narrow strip of concrete surrounded by defensive positions, barracks, maintenance facilities, and the Tactical Operations Center. 180 people called this remote outpost home, and in less than 3 hours, it would come under attack by overwhelming enemy forces. The approach was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced, even in her most challenging civilian training flights. The A-10 felt like it was falling apart around her, with control responses becoming increasingly sluggish and unpredictable. The manual reversion system required so much physical strength that her arms were beginning to cramp. And the aircraft wanted to drop its left wing due to damage to the flight control surfaces. Hammer 2-1, you're looking high and fast on approach. Recommend reducing power and extending landing gear, the tower controller advised. Maria tried to reduce power, but the throttles were barely responding. The left engine was running so rough that she was afraid it might seize completely, while the right engine was the only thing keeping them airborne. Tower, I'm having difficulty controlling power settings. The aircraft is not responding normally to throttle inputs. Santos, this is Master Sergeant Williams. Remember that this bird has always run a little hot on final approach. Try using speed brakes to control your descent rate instead of relying on throttle reductions. Williams' advice was perfect. As Maria deployed the speed brakes, she felt the aircraft's descent rate increase controllably. The A-10 was designed to be a rugged, forgiving aircraft that could handle abuse and still bring its pilot home safely. Even shot full of holes and running on emergency systems, it was trying to fulfill its design purpose. But as Maria lined up with the runway center line, a new crisis developed. The left main landing gear warning light began flashing red, indicating that the gear might not be properly locked in the down position. If the landing gear collapsed during touchdown, the aircraft would cartwheel across the runway in a ball of fire, destroying not only Maria and Morrison, but potentially damaging critical base infrastructure. Tower, I'm showing an unsafe gear indication on the left main. Request a visual inspection of my landing gear configuration. Santos, we have personnel observing your aircraft through binoculars. It appears that your left main landing gear is extended, but the gear door is damaged and partially obstructing the wheel. The gear appears to be locked, but we can't be certain it will hold under landing loads. Maria had less than 2 minutes to make a decision that would determine not only her fate and Morrison's, but potentially the fate of everyone on the base. She could attempt to land with questionable landing gear, risking a catastrophic crash that might destroy her aircraft and the intelligence it contained. Or she could attempt to go around, but with fuel gauges showing empty, she probably didn't have enough fuel for a second approach attempt. Santos, what are your intentions? The tower controller asked. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 180 lives depending on her decision. Tower, I'm committing to landing. If the gear fails, at least the aircraft will be on friendly territory and the intelligence can be recovered from the wreckage. As she crossed the runway threshold at 140 knots, Maria Santos was about to attempt the most important landing in the history of Forward Operating Base Hammer. The final approach to Forward Operating Base Hammer would be remembered as one of the most harrowing landings in military aviation history. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had committed to touchdown with questionable landing gear, empty fuel tanks, and an aircraft that was literally falling apart around her. Every person on the base had stopped what they were doing to watch the impossible unfold. A mechanic attempting to land a combat-damaged A-10 with an unconscious pilot in the back seat. Santos, you're looking good on centerline, the tower Controller reported, his voice steady despite the tension. Wind is calm, runway is clear. Crash and rescue teams are standing by. Maria could see the emergency vehicles positioned along the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, and recovery equipment, all waiting to respond to what everyone expected would be a catastrophic crash. The weight of 180 lives depending on her success pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. She had to not only survive this landing, but remain conscious and coherent enough to brief intelligence officers on Desert Viper's planned assault. As the runway threshold rushed toward her, Maria made final adjustments to her approach. The A-10 was flying like a wounded bird, requiring constant control inputs to maintain proper alignment. The manual reversion system had no power assist, meaning every adjustment required significant physical strength. Her arms were cramping from the effort, and sweat stung her eyes despite the air conditioning in her flight suit. 50 feet, 40, 30, The tower controller called out her altitude as she crossed the runway threshold. Maria felt the A-10 settle into ground effect, that cushion of air that forms between an aircraft's wings and the ground during the final moments of landing. For a brief instant, the wounded aircraft seemed to stabilize, flying smoothly for the first time since the anti-aircraft fire had nearly destroyed it over the mountains. 20 feet, 10. 5, double quotes. The moment of truth arrived as the main landing gear touched the concrete runway. Maria held her breath, waiting to see if the damaged left gear would hold or collapse catastrophically. The A-10 touched down hard, harder than any landing she had ever made, but the gear held. The aircraft bounced once, then settled onto hoof. The runway with a jarring impact that rattled every bolt and rivet in the airframe, but the ordeal wasn't over. As Maria applied the wheel brakes, she discovered that the anti-aircraft damage had affected the braking system as well. The left brake was completely inoperative, and the right brake was only partially functional. The heavy A-10, still carrying unexpended ammunition and fuel residue, began to veer toward the left side of the runway. "Santos, you're drifting left of center line," the tower warned. "Recommend using differential power to maintain directional control." Maria applied power to the left engine while reducing power on the right, using asymmetric thrust to counteract the aircraft's tendency to veer off the runway. It was a technique she had practiced countless times in the civilian Cessna with Chuck, but never in a 30,000-pound military aircraft with damaged systems. The A-10 straightened out, rolling down the center line of the runway as its speed gradually decreased. But at 80 knots, the left engine finally gave up completely, seizing with a grinding metallic scream that could be heard throughout the base. The sudden loss of power caused the aircraft to lurch violently to the left, heading directly toward a parked fuel truck. In that instant, Maria Santos drew upon every lesson Chuck had ever taught her about emergency aircraft handling. She yanked the control stick hard to the right while simultaneously applying full right rudder and maximum power on the remaining engine. The A-10 responded sluggishly, but it responded. The aircraft straightened out just enough to miss the fuel truck by less than 10 feet. As the airspeed finally dropped below 40 knots, Maria was able to use the nose wheel steering to guide the aircraft to a complete stop on the runway. For the first time in over an hour, Hammer 2-1 was motionless and safe. She had done it. She had brought the shot up at 10 home against impossible odds. "Hammer 2-1, welcome home," the tower controller said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was the finest piece of flying any of us have ever witnessed." Maria's hands were shaking as she began the shutdown procedures, but she forced herself to remain focused. Captain Morrison was still unconscious in the back seat, and time was running out before Desert Viper's assault began. She activated the emergency canopy release system, and the damaged cockpit canopy slowly opened with a grinding mechanical noise. The first person to reach the aircraft was Master Sergeant Williams, her maintenance supervisor, who climbed up the aircraft's boarding ladder with tears streaming down his face. "Santos, I don't know how the hell you did that, but you just saved all our lives. That was impossible, and you made it look routine." "Sergeant Williams, we need to get Captain Morrison to medical immediately," Maria said, unbuckling her harness. "And I need to get to the intelligence office right now. We have less than 2 hours before this base comes under massive attack." As medical personnel carefully extracted the injured pilot from the rear cockpit, Maria climbed down from the aircraft on unsteady legs. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the emergency landing was beginning to wear off, and the magnitude of what she had just accomplished was starting to sink in. She had not only survived an impossible situation, but she had delivered critical intelligence that could save hundreds of lives. Colonel Davidson was waiting for her as she reached the ground, his face a mixture of amazement and concern. "Santos, before we debrief the intelligence situation, I need to ask you a direct question. How the hell did you learn to fly like that? That wasn't beginner's luck. That was the work of an experienced pilot." Maria looked around at the crowd of personnel who had gathered to witness the landing, then back at the damaged A-10 that had carried her and Morrison safely home. The time for secrets was over. "Sir, I've been taking civilian flying lessons for 3 years. I hold a private pilot's license and have logged over 400 hours of flight time. I know I should have reported it through proper channels, but I was afraid it would affect my maintenance career." "Santos," Colonel Davidson said with a slight smile, "after what you just accomplished, I think we can discuss your career path later. Right now, I need you to tell me everything you know about Desert Viper's planned assault. Because according to the preliminary intelligence analysis, we have less than 90 minutes to prepare for the fight of our lives." The Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Hammer had been transformed into a crisis command center within minutes of Hammer 2-1's landing. Maps covered every available wall surface. Communication operators worked frantically at multiple radio consoles, and senior officers huddled around digital displays showing enemy force positions throughout the region. At the center of it all sat Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, still in her oil-stained flight suit, briefing the most senior military commanders in eastern Afghanistan on intelligence that could prevent a massacre. "Gentlemen, what Sergeant Santos has provided us changes everything we thought we knew about enemy capabilities in this region," Colonel Davidson announced to the assembled officers. "Desert Viper isn't just another Taliban commander. He's been coordinating the largest enemy offensive we've seen since the initial invasion." Maria stood before a large tactical display, using a laser pointer to indicate enemy positions she had observed during the failed mission. Despite her exhaustion from the harrowing flight and landing, her mind was sharp and focused. Lives depended on the accuracy of her intelligence briefing. "Based on electronic intercepts I gathered during our mission, Desert Viper has been consolidating forces for over 6 weeks. Maria began, her voice steady and professional. "The compound we attacked was a command and control center, not just a hideout. He's been coordinating with Taliban commanders across 3 provinces to mass nearly 2,000 fighters for simultaneous attacks on coalition positions." Major Peterson, the senior intelligence officer, studied the data on his tablet computer. "Sergeant Santos, these communication intercepts show a level of tactical sophistication we haven't seen before. They're using American-made encryption devices and following NATO tactical procedures. How did they acquire this capability?" "Sir, during our surveillance of the compound, I observed captured American equipment being distributed to enemy fighters. They have Stinger missiles, advanced radio systems, and what appeared to be captured tactical computers from previous attacks on supply convoys. But the most critical information is their timeline. They're planning coordinated attacks on FOB Hammer, FOB Lightning, and FOB Thunder at exactly 1400 hours today." Colonel Davidson checked his watch grimly. That gives us 73 minutes to prepare defensive measures and coordinate with the other bases. Santos, what can you tell us about their specific attack plans? Maria manipulated the digital display to show the terrain around Fob Hammer, highlighting approaches and defensive positions based on her analysis of intercepted enemy communications. Sir, they plan to use a three-phase assault. First, mortar and rocket attacks on our defensive positions and aircraft parking areas. Second, vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices will target the main gate and perimeter barriers. Third, infantry assault from multiple directions while we're dealing with the vehicle attacks. The tactical picture that emerged was terrifying in its complexity and scale. Desert Viper had studied American defensive tactics and developed countermeasures for standard operating procedures. His forces knew the locations of defensive positions, the typical response patterns of coalition forces, and the vulnerabilities of forward operating bases throughout the region. They have inside information, Maria continued, her analysis chilling the room. The communication intercept suggests they've been receiving intelligence from someone with detailed knowledge of coalition operations. They know our shift changes, our patrol schedules, and our standard defensive procedures. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the base operations officer, leaned forward intently. Santos, are you suggesting we have a security breach? Someone on the inside providing information to enemy forces. Sir, I can't confirm the source of their intelligence, but they have information that could only come from someone with access to classified operational data. They know which aircraft are mission capable, when supply convoys are scheduled to arrive, and even the locations of our underground bunkers. The implications were staggering. If enemy forces had detailed intelligence on coalition defensive measures, the planned attacks could succeed despite advance warning. Desert Viper's forces would know exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage and casualties. Colonel Davidson turned to his communications officer. Get me secure channels to FOB Lightning and Fob Thunder immediately. They need this intelligence right now. Also, contact Regional Command and request immediate close air support and quick reaction force deployment. Sir, the communications officer replied, we're having difficulty establishing secure communications with the other bases. Someone is jamming our primary frequencies. Maria felt her blood run cold. Colonel, that's part of their plan. The communication intercept showed they have electronic warfare capabilities. They're going to blind us before the attack begins, preventing coordination between bases and blocking requests for reinforcement. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Not only were 3 forward operating bases about to come under coordinated attack by overwhelming enemy forces, but the defenders would be fighting without communication support or the ability to call for help. It was a scenario designed to maximize casualties and minimize the coalition's ability to respond effectively. Santos, Colonel Davidson said grimly, based on your intelligence analysis, what are our chances of successfully defending this base? Maria had been dreading this question, but she owed these officers, and the 180 people they commanded, complete honesty. Sir, under normal circumstances, with full communication capabilities and advance warning, we have a good chance of repelling the attack. But if they succeed in jamming our communications and execute their plan as designed, we're facing nearly 10-to-1 odds with limited ability to coordinate defensive measures. The silence in the Tactical Operations Center was profound as the reality of their situation sank in. In less than 70 minutes, FOB Hammer would come under attack by the largest enemy force assembled in the region since the war began. The defenders would be outnumbered, outgunned, and potentially cut off from outside support. However, Maria continued, there is one advantage we have that they don't know about. They planned this attack assuming we would have no advance warning. The fact that we know it's coming gives us the opportunity to turn their own tactics against them. Colonel Davidson looked up with the first hint of hope he had shown since the briefing began. "Santos, what do you have in mind?" Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stood before the assembled officers in the Tactical Operations Center, her mind racing through tactical possibilities that could turn certain defeat into victory. The intelligence she had gathered during the failed mission had revealed Desert Viper's plan in devastating detail, but it had also exposed weaknesses in the enemy's approach that could be exploited by defenders who knew what was coming. "Gentlemen, Desert Viper's plan depends on achieving tactical surprise and overwhelming our defensive positions before we can mount effective resistance," Maria began, manipulating the digital tactical display to show enemy approach routes. "But if we can make them believe their surprise attack is working while actually drawing them into prepared killing zones, we can turn their numerical advantage into a liability." Colonel Davidson studied the terrain map intently. "Santos, explain. You're thinking. How do we make 180 defenders look like 2,000 attackers?" "Sir, the key is understanding how Desert Viper has planned to use our own defensive procedures against us. He expects us to concentrate our forces at obvious defensive positions, the main gate, the perimeter towers, the aircraft revetments. Instead, we abandon those positions and set up interlocking fields of fire from concealed positions that he doesn't know about." Maria had spent hundreds of hours studying the base layout during her maintenance duties, identifying every building, every piece of equipment, every potential fighting position that wasn't marked on official tactical maps. Her unique perspective as a mechanic who worked throughout the base had given her insights that even seasoned infantry officers might miss. "The maintenance hangars have reinforced construction and clear fields of fire toward the main approach routes," she continued, highlighting positions on the display. "The fuel storage bunkers can provide cover for defensive positions that would be invisible to attackers approaching from the expected directions. And the communications tower has a clear view of the entire base perimeter." Major Peterson, the intelligence officer, was taking detailed notes on everything Maria suggested. "Sergeant Santos, this is excellent tactical analysis, but we still have the problem of communications jamming. How do we coordinate defensive efforts if we can't talk to each other?" "Sir, during my cross-training with the electronics warfare specialists, I learned about alternative communication methods that enemy forces might not be able to jam. We can use the aircraft intercom systems, the base public address network, and even the maintenance facility telephone lines to coordinate defensive actions." What Maria didn't mention was that her cross-training had included studying captured enemy communication equipment, learning how their jamming systems worked, and identifying frequencies that might remain clear during electronic warfare operations. Her mechanical aptitude and natural curiosity had led her to understand complex electronic systems far beyond her official job requirements. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the operations officer, was studying Maria's proposed offensive plan with growing excitement. "Santos, this could actually work. If we can convince them that their initial attacks are succeeding, while actually channeling them into prepared ambush positions, we might be able to inflict enough casualties to break their assault." "There's more, sir," Maria continued. "The communication intercepts revealed that Desert Viper is personally leading this attack. He's planning to be in the second wave of the assault, coordinating the final push to overrun our positions. If we can identify and target him specifically, the entire enemy force might lose cohesion." Colonel Davidson was beginning to see the possibilities in Maria's plan. "Santos, you're suggesting we let them think they're winning the initial phase of the attack, then spring a counter-ambush when their leadership is most exposed." "Exactly, sir. But there's one critical element that makes this possible. They don't know that we know they're coming. Desert Viper has spent weeks planning this attack based on the assumption of complete tactical surprise. If we can maintain that illusion while actually preparing to receive them, we can turn their own plan into a trap." The plan that emerged from Maria's intelligence analysis was audacious and risky, but it offered the best chance of survival for the 180 personnel at Phobe Hammer. Instead of manning obvious defensive positions, the defenders would abandon their normal posts and take up concealed positions throughout the base. When the enemy assault began, they would allow the attackers to penetrate the perimeter while channeling them into carefully prepared kill zones. "The timing has to be perfect," Maria warned. "If we spring the ambush too early, they'll have time to reorganize and overwhelm us through sheer numbers. If we wait too long, they might discover our real positions and turn the tables on us." As the officers began implementing Maria's defensive plan, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders once again. It wasn't enough that she had successfully landed a critically damaged aircraft and delivered crucial intelligence. Now the survival of everyone on the base depended on the tactical accuracy of her analysis and recommendations. "Santos," Colonel Davidson said as the briefing concluded, "I want you to know that regardless of what happens in the next few hours, what you've accomplished today goes far beyond anything we could have expected from anyone, regardless of rank or training. You've already saved lives, and now you're giving us a fighting chance to save more." But Maria wasn't finished. As the officers dispersed to implement the defensive plan, she remained in the Tactical Operations Center, studying the intelligence data and looking for additional advantages that might tip the odds in their favor. The communication intercepts contained information that she hadn't had time to fully analyze during the crisis of the emergency landing and initial briefing. "Colonel," she called out as Davidson was leaving the briefing room, "there's one more thing. The electronic intercepts show that Desert Viper is coordinating his attack using a specific radio frequency and encryption protocol. If we can monitor that frequency, we might be able to track his movements in real time during the battle. Santos, can you handle the electronic monitoring while we're fighting for our lives?" Maria looked around at the sophisticated communication equipment in the Tactical Operations Center, then back at Colonel Davidson with quiet confidence. "Sir, I've been preparing for this my entire career. I can monitor their communications, coordinate our defensive responses, and if necessary, I can get back in that cockpit and provide close air support from our remaining aircraft." In 47 minutes, the battle for Forward Operating Base Hammer would begin. And Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the mechanic who had been underestimated by everyone around her, was about to prove that heroes come in all forms. At exactly 13:57 hours 3 minutes before Desert Viper's planned assault on Forward Operating Base Hammer, an eerie silence fell over the remote outpost in the mountains of Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos sat in the Tactical Operations Center, monitoring enemy communications through headphones, while watching digital displays that showed defensive positions throughout the base. 179 other American service members were hidden in carefully chosen fighting positions, waiting for the battle that would determine whether they lived or died. "All stations, this is Hammer Base. Enemy forces are moving into final assault positions. Maintain communications discipline and hold fire until the predetermined signal." Colonel Davidson transmitted over the alternative communication network that Maria had helped establish. The plan she had developed was now being put to its ultimate test. Instead of manning obvious defensive positions that Desert Viper's forces expected to find occupied, the defenders were concealed in locations throughout the base that would allow them to catch the attackers in a devastating crossfire. But the success of the plan depended on perfect timing and iron discipline. If anyone opened fire too early, the entire ambush would be compromised. "Colonel, I'm monitoring enemy command frequency," Maria reported quietly. "Desert Viper is personally directing the assault from a position approximately 800 meters northeast of the main gate. He's coordinating with 3 separate assault groups and a reserve force." Through her headphones, Maria could hear the enemy commander's voice as he issued final orders to his fighters. Her months of studying captured enemy communication protocols had given her the ability to understand not only the tactical meaning of their transmissions, but the emotional undertones that revealed their confidence level and state of preparation. "Sir, they're extremely confident," she continued. "Desert Viper is telling his commanders that they'll be eating dinner in our mess hall tonight. He has no idea that we're ready for them." At exactly 1400 hours, the attack began with a thunderous barrage of mortar and rocket fire directed at the base's perimeter defensive positions. Explosions erupted throughout Phobe Hammer as enemy forces targeted guard towers, aircraft parking areas, and the main gate complex. But instead of finding American defenders in those positions, the attackers were destroying empty buildings and unmanned fortifications. "Phase 1 of their attack is proceeding exactly as predicted," Maria reported to Colonel Davidson. "They're expending ammunition on empty positions while our people remain safely concealed." The sound of diesel engines roaring at high speed announced the beginning of Phase 2, vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices racing toward the main gate and perimeter barriers. Two massive trucks, loaded with explosives and driven by suicide bombers, crashed through the outer defensive barriers and detonated with earth-shaking force. The explosions created huge gaps in the perimeter fence and filled the air with smoke and debris. "Vehicle attacks successful from their perspective," Maria continued her running commentary. "They believe they've breached our perimeter defenses. Infantry assault groups are now moving toward what they think are our primary defensive positions." Nearly 500 enemy fighters began pouring through the gaps in the perimeter, firing automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades at buildings. They expected to contain American defenders. They moved with practiced coordination, following rehearsed assault patterns, designed to overwhelm a defense that was fighting from fixed positions, according to standard military doctrine. But as the enemy forces advanced deeper into the base, they were actually walking into the most carefully prepared ambush in the history of modern warfare. Maria's intelligence analysis had predicted their exact approach routes, their tactical objectives, and even their individual unit movements. The defenders were waiting in positions that would allow them to engage the attackers from multiple directions simultaneously. "Enemy forces are now in the primary kill zone," Maria announced. "All assault groups have committed to their attacks. Desert Viper is moving his command post forward to coordinate the final phase." Colonel Davidson waited until the optimal moment, when the maximum number of enemy fighters were exposed in the open areas between buildings, then gave the signal that Maria had been waiting for. "All stations, this is Hammer Base. Execute, execute, execute." The counterattack was devastating and immediate. American defenders opened fire from concealed positions throughout the base, catching the enemy assault groups in interlocking fields of fire that left them no avenue of escape. Machine guns, sniper rifles, and automatic weapons created a deadly crossfire that cut down enemy fighters who had believed they were on the verge of victory. "Phase 1 of our ambush is successful," Maria reported, monitoring both the tactical situation and enemy communications. "But sir, Desert Viper is attempting to rally his forces for a renewed assault. He's calling up his reserve force and requesting support from artillery positions in the surrounding mountains." The battle raged for 47 minutes with enemy forces launching repeated attempts to break through American defensive positions. But each assault was met by precisely coordinated defensive fire from positions that Desert Viper's intelligence had never identified. The tactical advantage of advance warning, combined with Maria's innovative defensive plan, was proving decisive. At 1447 hours, Maria intercepted a critical enemy transmission that changed everything. "Desert Viper is ordering a general retreat. His forces have taken over 60% casualties, and he's lost contact with 2 of his 3 assault group commanders." But the battle wasn't over. As enemy forces began withdrawing through the perimeter breaches they had created, Colonel Davidson made a decision that would end Desert Viper's threat permanently. "Santos, can we pursue them with close air support?" Maria looked up from her communication monitoring equipment with a slight smile. "Sir, I believe Warhawk 24 is mission capable and ready for immediate launch. And I happen to know that aircraft better than anyone else on this base." 30 minutes later, Maria Santos was back in the cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, leading a pursuit mission that would destroy the remainder of Desert Viper's forces and capture the Taliban commander himself. The mechanic, who had been underestimated by everyone around her, had not only saved 180 lives at FOB Hammer, but her intelligence analysis and tactical planning had prevented coordinated attacks on 2 other bases that would have cost hundreds of additional American lives. The woman they had called just a mechanic had become the hero who changed the course of the war in eastern Afghanistan. And her story was just beginning. As the sun began to set over the mountains of Afghanistan, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos found herself once again in the cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, this time leading a pursuit mission that would write the final chapter in Desert Viper's reign of terror. Warhawk 24 was fully mission capable, armed with a complete load of Maverick missiles and maximum ammunition for the devastating GAU-8 cannon. But unlike her harrowing emergency flight just hours earlier, this mission was different. Maria was now officially recognized as a combat pilot, flying with the full authority and support of Coalition Command. "Hammer Flight, this is Hammer Base." Colonel Davidson's voice crackled through her headset. "You are cleared to pursue and engage fleeing enemy forces." Desert Viper's convoy was last observed heading northeast through the Coast Valley. Intelligence indicates he has approximately 200 surviving fighters and is attempting to reach safe haven across the Pakistani border. Maria checked her instruments and weapon systems, her movements now confident and practiced after the morning's emergency flight. Captain Morrison, recovered from his injuries and flying as her wingman in Warhawk 25, provided backup support for what would become known as the most successful close air support mission in the history of Operation Enduring Freedom. "Santos, I still can't believe you've been hiding pilot skills like that," Morrison transmitted over their tactical frequency. "The way you handled that emergency landing was better than anything they teach at the Air Force Academy." "Thank you, sir," Maria replied, banking the A-10 toward the valley where enemy forces were attempting to escape. "But let's finish what we started this morning. Those people down there have been terrorizing coalition forces for months, and today we end it." The pursuit took them through the same mountain passes where the original mission had gone wrong. But this time Maria was flying a fully functional aircraft with complete situational awareness. The electronic intelligence gathering systems that had been damaged during the morning attack were now operational, providing real-time information about enemy locations and movements. "Hammer Base, this is Santos. I'm picking up multiple vehicle signatures in the valley below. Looks like a convoy of approximately 15 vehicles moving at high speed toward the border crossing." Through her targeting systems, Maria could see the desperate retreat of Desert Viper's forces. Trucks loaded with wounded fighters, command vehicles carrying communication equipment, and heavily armed pickup trucks racing through the narrow valley floor. The Taliban commander who had orchestrated the coordinated assault on 3 coalition bases was now running for his life, his carefully planned offensive having turned into a complete disaster. "Santos, this is Colonel Davidson. You are authorized to engage all fleeing enemy forces. These are the same fighters who attacked our base, and intelligence confirms they were planning similar attacks throughout the region." Maria armed her weapon systems and began her attack run, diving toward the convoy at high speed. The familiar weight of the A-10's controls felt natural in her hands now, and she could sense the aircraft's eagerness to engage the enemy that had nearly destroyed it just hours earlier. The morning's emergency flight had been about survival. This mission was about justice. The first pass was devastating. Maria's Maverick missiles found their targets with precision, destroying 3. vehicles and scattering the convoy across the valley floor. Enemy fighters abandoned their vehicles and sought cover among the rocks and sparse vegetation, but there was nowhere to hide from the A-10 sensors and weapons. "Good hit, Santos," Captain Morrison called out as he began his own attack run. "I'm seeing multiple secondary explosions. Looks like some of those vehicles were carrying ammunition." As the two A-10s worked methodically through the scattered enemy forces, Maria monitored the radio frequencies that Desert Viper's forces had been using for coordination. The confident, organized communications she had intercepted during the Faiva morning attack had been replaced by panicked transmissions and desperate calls for help that would never come. "Hammer Base, this is Santos. I'm monitoring enemy communications, and it sounds like Desert Viper himself is trapped in one of the remaining vehicles. He's calling for reinforcements, but there's no response from any of his subordinate commanders." The Taliban leader, who had spent months planning the largest coordinated assault against coalition forces, was now isolated and alone, his network of fighters either dead, wounded, or fleeing individually through the mountains. The intelligence network he had built, the weapons he had stockpiled, and the tactical plans he had developed were all destroyed in the span of a single day. "Santos, can you confirm Desert Viper's location?" Colonel Davidson asked. Maria switched to her aircraft's advanced targeting systems, using thermal imaging and electronic surveillance to scan the remaining vehicles in the convoy. Years of training in electronic warfare and intelligence gathering had taught her to recognize the signatures of command vehicles and communication equipment. "Sir, I have positive identification on Desert Viper's vehicle. It's a modified land cruiser with enhanced communication equipment, stopped approximately 2 miles from the border crossing. The vehicle appears to be disabled, and I'm seeing multiple personnel on foot around it. Santos, you are cleared to engage. End this threat permanently." Maria lined up for her final attack run, knowing that this moment would determine the future security of coalition forces throughout eastern Afghanistan. Desert Viper had been responsible for coordinating attacks that had killed dozens of American and Allied personnel over the past year. His elimination would save countless lives and disrupt enemy operations for months to come. As she released her final Maverick missile, Maria watched through her targeting system as Desert Viper's reign of terror came to an end in a burst of flame and smoke in the remote valley below. The Taliban commander who had nearly succeeded in overrunning 3 coalition bases was gone, along with his carefully planned offensive and his network of fighters. "Target destroyed," Maria reported calmly. "Desert Viper is confirmed eliminated. Mission accomplished." 6 weeks after the battle that saved Forward Operating Base Hammer, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stood on the tarmac at Bagram Airfield. Wearing the uniform of a newly commissioned second lieutenant in the United States Air Force, the transformation from underestimated mechanic to officially recognized combat pilot had been swift and unprecedented, but it reflected the magnitude of what she had accomplished on that extraordinary day in the mountains of Afghanistan. The ceremony was attended by senior military officials from throughout the theater of operations, including General Patricia McKenzie, the commanding general of coalition air forces in Afghanistan. Media representatives from major news networks had traveled to the remote airbase to document the story of the mechanic who had saved 180 lives and changed the course of military operations in the region. "Ladies and gentlemen," General McKenzie announced to the assembled crowd, "today we recognize not just individual heroism, but the kind of courage and innovation that defines the very best of American military service. Second Lieutenant Maria Santos represents everything we value in our service members: technical expertise, tactical innovation, and the willingness to risk everything to save the lives of fellow Americans." The awards ceremony was unlike anything in recent military history. Maria received the Distinguished Flying Cross for her emergency landing of the damaged A-10, the Silver Star for her intelligence gathering and tactical planning that prevented the enemy assault, and a direct commission to officer rank based on her demonstrated leadership and combat effectiveness. But perhaps more importantly, her actions had led to fundamental changes in how the military viewed cross-training and the potential contributions of enlisted personnel. The intelligence that Lieutenant Santos gathered during her emergency flight prevented what could have been the largest coalition defeat since the beginning of Operation Enduring Freedom. General Mackenzie continued. Her tactical analysis and defensive planning saved not only the 180 personnel at FOB Hammer, but hundreds of additional lives at bases throughout the region. Captain Morrison, fully recovered from his injuries and promoted to major for his role in the mission, served as Maria's sponsor for the commissioning ceremony. "I've flown with some of the best pilots in the Air Force," he said during his remarks, "but I've never seen anyone handle an aircraft under impossible conditions the way Lieutenant Santos did. She didn't just save my life, she taught all of us that heroism comes in forms we might never expect." The impact of Maria's actions extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Military leadership had begun implementing new cross-training programs that would give maintenance personnel basic flight training and intelligence gathering skills. The assumption that mechanics, technicians, and support personnel should be limited to their specific job functions had been permanently challenged by Maria's example. What Lieutenant Santos accomplished demonstrates that we may be underutilizing the talents and capabilities of our enlisted personnel, explained Colonel Davidson, who had been promoted to Brigadier General following the successful defense of FOB Hammer. Her combination of mechanical expertise, flight skills, and intelligence analysis created capabilities that no single traditional military specialty could have provided. The story of the mechanic who became a hero had spread throughout the military and captured the attention of the American public. Maria had become a symbol of the hidden potential that existed within the ranks of ordinary service members, and her example was inspiring changes in training, personnel policies, and military culture. But for Maria herself, the recognition and accolades were secondary to the knowledge that she had saved lives and served her country when it mattered most. During interviews with military historians and media representatives, she consistently emphasized the contributions of everyone who had participated in the defense of FOB Hammer. "I didn't save 180 lives by myself," Maria explained during one interview. "Colonel Davidson trusted my intelligence analysis and tactical recommendations. Master Sergeant Williams and the maintenance crew kept our aircraft mission ready. Captain Morrison flew as my wingman during the pursuit mission, even though he was still recovering from his injuries. Every person on that base contributed to our survival." The technical analysis of Maria's emergency landing had become a case study taught at the Air Force Test Pilot School and the Naval Test Pilot School. Aviation experts marveled at her ability to control a severely damaged aircraft using only manual reversion systems, and her landing technique had been incorporated into emergency procedures training for military pilots worldwide. The physics of what Lieutenant Santos accomplished should have been impossible, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an aerospace engineer who had studied the incident. The combination of battle damage, system failures, and control limitations created a situation that would challenge even the most experienced test pilots. The fact that she not only survived, but executed a successful landing demonstrates skills that go far beyond normal pilot training. The A-10 Thunderbolt II that Maria had landed, Hammer 2-1, had been repaired and returned to service, but it now carried special markings commemorating the historic flight. The aircraft had been renamed Santos Spirit and served as a flying monument to the courage and ingenuity of the mechanic who had refused to give up when everything seemed hopeless. As the ceremony concluded and Maria pinned on her new officers' rank, she looked out at the flight line where mechanics were preparing aircraft for the day's missions. She thought about all the talented, dedicated service members who were working behind the scenes, maintaining equipment, analyzing intelligence, and supporting combat operations without recognition or glory. The real lesson of what happened at FOB Hammer, Maria said in her acceptance speech, is that every American service member has the potential to rise to extraordinary circumstances. We may wear different uniforms and perform different jobs, but when lives are on the line, we're all capable of heroism. The ceremony ended with a flyover by 4 A-10 Thunderbolt IIs, led by Maria herself in Santa's spirit. As the formation thundered overhead, everyone present understood they had witnessed something historic, not just a recognition of individual courage, but a transformation in how the military understood the potential of every person who chose to serve. 5 years after the battle that saved Forward Operating Base Hammer, the ripple effects of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos' heroic actions continued to transform American military operations around the world. Now Major Maria Santos, she served as the director of the Cross-Training Initiative at the Pentagon, a revolutionary program that had fundamentally changed how the military developed and utilized the talents of its personnel. The program she had inspired trained mechanics to become pilots, intelligence analysts to become combat engineers, and communications specialists to become tactical planners. The rigid barriers between military occupational specialties had been replaced by a fluid system that recognized the hidden potential within every service member. It was a transformation that military historians would later identify as one of the most significant personnel reforms of the 21st century. Major Santos' example proved that artificial limitations on human potential create artificial limitations on military effectiveness, explained General Patricia McKenzie, now the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, during a speech at the Air Force Academy. When we stopped thinking of people as mechanics or pilots or intelligence analysts, and started thinking of them as complete military professionals, we unleashed capabilities we never knew existed. The numbers spoke for themselves. In the 5 years since the cross-training initiative began, military units had reported a 34% improvement in operational flexibility, a 28% reduction in critical skill shortages, and a 42% increase in successful mission outcomes during complex operations. Personnel retention had increased dramatically as service members found new opportunities for growth and advancement that transcended traditional career boundaries. But perhaps the most significant impact was cultural. The story of the mechanic who had saved 180 lives had become legendary within military circles, inspiring thousands of enlisted personnel to pursue advanced training and education. Maria's example had demonstrated that heroism and leadership were not limited to those with college degrees or officer ranks. They were qualities that could emerge from any background, any specialty, any level of the military hierarchy. When I joined the Air Force as an aircraft mechanic, I thought my career path was predetermined, said Technical Sergeant Jennifer Rodriguez during a cross-training initiative graduation ceremony. Major Santos showed all of us that we can be more than our job descriptions. She didn't just save lives that day in Afghanistan. She saved careers and dreams for thousands of us who came after her. The academic study of Maria's actions had become a cornerstone of military education at institutions worldwide. The Naval War College, the Army Command and General Staff College, and the Air War College all included detailed analysis of the FOB Hammer defense in their curricula. Military strategists studied her integration of mechanical knowledge, flight skills, and intelligence analysis as an example of how diverse competencies could create synergistic effects in combat situations. Dr. Michael Chun, a professor of military strategy at the Naval War College, had written extensively about what became known as the Santos paradigm, the concept that modern warfare required warriors who could think and operate across traditional specialty boundaries. Major Santos didn't save those lives because she was an exceptional mechanic or an exceptional pilot. He explained in his landmark book, The Complete Warrior. She saved them because she was an exceptional human being who refused to be limited. by conventional thinking about what a mechanic could or should do. The technical innovations that emerged from Maria's emergency landing had also transformed aircraft design and pilot training. The manual reversion systems that had allowed her to control the damaged A-10 were now standard equipment on all military aircraft. Emergency landing procedures had been revised to incorporate techniques she had pioneered during her desperate flight home from the mountains. Boeing and Lockheed Martin had hired Maria as a consultant during the development of next-generation combat aircraft, incorporating her insights about pilot aircraft interface design and emergency systems functionality. Her mechanical expertise combined with operational flying experience provided a unique perspective that traditional test pilots and engineers couldn't replicate. Major Santos understands aircraft from the inside out in a way that very few people ever achieve, explained Sarah Thompson, chief test pilot for the F-35 Lightning II program. She knows not just how to fly the airplane, but how every system works, how it fails, and how to make it work when it shouldn't be able to. That knowledge has made our aircraft safer and more reliable for every pilot who flies them. The humanitarian impact of Maria's actions extended far beyond the immediate lives saved at FOB Hammer. The intelligence she had gathered about Desert Viper's network had led to the dismantling of terrorist cells throughout South Asia, preventing attacks that could have killed hundreds of civilians. Counterterrorism experts estimated that her intelligence contributions had saved more than 1,000 lives over the 5 years following the incident. The 3 forward operating bases that would have been attacked, FOB Hammer, FOB Lightning, and FOB Thunder, had all been expanded and strengthened based on lessons learned from Desert Viper's planned assault. They now served as regional training centers where coalition forces from around the world learned the defensive tactics that Maria had pioneered during those desperate hours when 180 lives hung in the balance. On the 5th anniversary of the battle, Maria returned to Afghanistan for a memorial ceremony honoring all personnel who had served at Forward Operating Base Hammer. The remote outpost had been renamed Santos Base in her honor, and it now served as a symbol of American determination and ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds, standing on the same tarmac where she had landed a shot-up A-10 with an unconscious pilot 5 years earlier. Maria reflected on how a single day had changed not only her own life, but the lives of thousands of people she would never meet. The mechanic who had been underestimated and overlooked had become a major, a pilot, an innovator, and an inspiration. "They called me just a mechanic," Maria said during her speech at the memorial ceremony, looking out at an audience that included many of the 180 people whose lives she had saved. "But I learned that there's no such thing as just anything when it comes to serving your country. Every person who wears this uniform has the potential to change history. Sometimes you just have to be ready when history calls your name." As the ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for all who had served at FOB Hammer, the assembled crowd understood they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just the recognition of past heroism, but the continuing legacy of a woman who had proven that courage, innovation, and determination could overcome any obstacle. The story of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the mechanic who became a hero and changed the world, would be told for generations to come, inspiring future warriors to look beyond limitations and reach for possibilities that others said were impossible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.